How responsible is the Reserve Bank for the current high rate of inflation? Well, economist John McDermott believes the bank has to take some responsibility, and he joins me now. Your main concern, John, I think, is with the operation of this funding for lending program. Tell me, what's the problem with that?
Yeah, well, let's start with, the Reserve Bank has got an inflation problem. So you expect them to increase interest rates and actually reduce the money supply. Those are the two things you should be doing to fix the problem. And there's certainly increase in interest rates, so fine on that account. But when you look at the balance sheet, you see the monetary base is increasing and increasing rapidly. And, normally you'd expect it to be around about $15 billion. It's heading towards $60 billion. That's a big increase. And it's not retreating, it's actually going up. So they're adding to the inflation problem, not subtracting from it. And then just so to your question specifically, the increase in the monetary base over the last few years has come from two sources. One is they've been buying government bonds, and then the other one is this so-called funding for lending program where they make available to the banks money that they can borrow. Now, the purchase of government bonds has stopped, so that can't be the culprit. The only thing left is this funding for lending program, which started in late 2020, but it seems to be still going. And why would you have it why would you pump liquidity in the system when you're trying to actually restrict and slow the economy down to cure inflation?
And are banks really taking advantage of that now then?
Why not? Why not? So the banks can borrow on a 3-year term at the official cash rate. If they had to go to market and borrow at the 3-year swap rate, that would cost them 200 basis points more, or 2 percentage points. That's a pretty decent discount for the banks. So they have a strong incentive to use this vehicle.
And so in your view, that's helped add a bit of fuel to the fire of inflation?
Oh, it's dramatic. Yeah, the Reserve Bank is increasing the country's monetary base, which is the exact opposite of what every textbook would tell you. When you've got an inflation problem, you reduce your monetary base, you do not increase it.
But you don't have a problem with them having bought up government bonds to help finance the government's fiscal policy?
So that was in the past. And look, back in 2020, when they started that was absolutely necessary. The financial system, together with lots of other problems in the economy, was seizing up. So they needed to liquefy the problem. But that was 2 years ago. That was when the emergency settings were put in place. Not only should they not be increasing, they should be taking that away. And look, other countries have done it. So I use the example of Norway that increased their monetary base dramatically, more dramatically than New Zealand in 2020. And they've already returned their monetary base back to normal.
The Reserve Bank says it is going to ease back, sell back bonds and what have you. I mean, when it starts to do that, won't that then contract the monetary base?
Certainly, and that will help. But the thing is, they should already be doing it. They shouldn't be promising to do it. And in the meantime, inflation will only get worse and be a persistent problem.
So they're just being too slow to respond on that side of the equation?
Yeah. So they've stopped buying government bonds. That's good. They should be selling them down. That can be a little tricky, but you can start. But what they're doing is actually increasing the money from the funding to lending programs to the banks when that program should have already ended. And if you don't want to end it, at the very least, here's a good rule for central bankers. When you're in a crisis, you lend money freely to make sure you give the liquidity as necessary, but you do it at penal rates. You do it so it costs the banks a little bit more in interest. So when the crisis is over, the banks have this incentive to stop going to using that facility. And it's self-correcting. The mistake here seems to be, rather than charge the banks the market rate, they've charged them a subsidized rate. That's the mistake, I think.
I think the bank's got the sense that they put it up and they've got to commit to it. They can't pull it away from the retail banks now.
But that's crazy. It's doing damage to the New Zealand economy. It should be ended.
Why don't you think then the Reserve Bank is doing that?
I think I said right in the article, that's a major puzzle. It defies common sense. It defies the economics textbook. That program should be ended to help the Reserve Bank or speed up the Reserve Bank curing inflation, which is its current problem. The problems of 2020 have gone. They've got a new problem. They should focus on that.
So because though it's continuing with that, does that mean that we, households, are going to end up paying more in interest rates than we otherwise would have to?
Yeah, well, if you're trying to cure inflation, and on one hand, you're pumping liquidity into the system, you have to snap harder on the other tool that you're using, which is higher interest rates. So interest rates are going to be, in the long run, higher than otherwise would be the case. And if you've got a mortgage or you've got a business debt, you end up paying for that.
John McDermott, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.